very good evening to all our viewers on Globespan 24x7 as we bring you tonight's program, our regular Monday night program. We want to thank our sponsors for being part of this program and, of course, to your audience for joining in tonight. We also want to thank Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and, of course, Devin Bisu and his team for the technical assistance that they're providing for this program. This evening, as we come to the last day of February, can you believe that 2 months of the year has already come to an end? We started March 1st tomorrow, and I remember a quiz that was asked on Guyana's radio a few years ago when you were calling in to answer questions and they were playing songs. And one of the questions was, can February march? And of course, the answer was no, but April, May. So we want to welcome March as we say goodbye to February. This evening, we are discussing Guyana's cultural expression and Mashramani celebration. And who else is there to discuss with us with two of Guyana's iconic figures. One is Russel Lancaster. He's a veteran broadcaster. And Russel has been around in a lot of cultural activities for Guyana. So Russel, we want to welcome you tonight to the program.
Thank you very much.
Also joining us shortly, because Al Creighton is, as all of us know, he's a professor at the University of Guyana. So he has a class now, and when his class is over, he will join us on the program. So we welcome Al at that time. Mr. Lancaster, many Guyanese who listen to the radio, of course, would have known about Russel Lancaster being on the medium of radio. But can you tell our audience exactly who is Russel Lancaster, where you've come from, what are you doing, and something about yourself?
Okay, I remember when I was 2 years of age, my parents asked me what I wanted to be. And I said I wanted to be an artist. And a little later on, my parents said to me, well, you can be an artist, but you've got to be something a little more than an artist. You got to do something that earns money, because artists don't earn money. So eventually, when I got to A-levels, it was decided that I would do architecture. So I went to the University of Guyana at 17, and I started in the architecture program. I was totally bored. I left, I dropped out of university, and I went off and I worked in theater. And from that, I got into radio. Ron Robinson said to me, you've got a voice for radio. And at 19 years of age, I started working at the radio station. And as they say, the rest is history. I performed in a number of plays. I got awards for acting. I got involved in directing. And I've been continually working in cultural aspects of Guyana over all the years. I think my particular interest, however, is education, because I think that at the end of the day, if people are not educated, and when we talk about education, I'm not merely talking about academic education. I'm talking about a holistic education that involves the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And I think people need to be rounded, need to be able to understand that they need to be able to operate in a world that has many different aspects. So for me, education is the primary element of any aspect of culture. If we don't understand where we've come from, how do we understand where we're going?
Excellent piece. What about your personal life? I was thinking of your personal life as well.
I don't like to talk about my personal life too much because I think it's personal. And as such, that should be.
No, are you married with children?
I'm not a public figure in the sense that I need to tell people what I'm doing personally. I do think that as an artist and somebody who expresses at a public forum, we need to talk about the art that I do. So personally, I don't really get into that. I think that's something that needs to be kept private at all times.
And we respect that statement. That's very good. So Russel, tonight we want to talk about cultural expression. I think most of our viewers listening, and even myself, we are kind of confused. What really is the real definition of culture? And in saying that, does Guyana have a culture?
Well, for me, I think culture is an evolving thing because if we think about who we are at any given point, that is our culture. The things we do are our culture, whether it be the way we eat, the way we dress, the way we operate, the way we consume artistic elements, all of it is a part of culture. So culture goes beyond art. Culture is more about living expression in a given space and time based on the things that are affecting us. So we respond to things in different ways. To give you an example, if we didn't have flour, as we didn't have in the 70s and 80s, we then responded by finding other approaches to food. Hence, we learned to use rice flour or other things that were available. So culture is really about how do we find solutions to living problems. And that becomes the expression of who we are. Let's take music as another example. If you didn't have access to European drums or whatever, I remember us making drums out of pieces of tin, and the bottom of a barrel, we would cut off the barrel halfway, and we would put two sticks with a boom against it, and that created a drum for us. So culture is how you respond to the issues that you're dealing with and still have the ability to express yourself.
Beautifully put. So within an ethnic group, would there be more than one culture within an ethnic group, in your view?
Well, it all depends on where you are. Let's just take Indians, for example. Indians in India have a very different culture from Indians in Guyana. So it's the same background, the same ethnic background, but how they express is very different because they're dealing with different things. Language is the same thing. So if your language has to change and you still have to express yourself and you still have to communicate, you will find ways to adjust your language so that it meets the needs of where you are. So language is culture, food is culture, art is culture, clothes are culture. Everything is culture around us, the things we do about living and how we express ourselves in life.
And that brings a good point, because even within our former three counties of Demerara, Asquith, and Berbice, each one of them seemed to have something different from the others, even within the country itself, even within your own ethnic group. I mean, the Asquith people might do something differently than the Berbicians are doing. And of course, Demerara will, be sandwiched in between. So it's possible that is culture a dynamic thing? Does it change over time? Is it static?
Of course it does. Of course it does. It changes all the time. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to the quarantine. And curiously enough, I thought I knew what Guyanese dialect was, and as I understood Guyanese dialect. I went to the quarantine, jumped into what is called tapir, and I'm sitting in this vehicle, and we're driving down the road in the quarantine, and people are talking, and I thought I was in a different country.
Wow.
I could not understand a word they were saying.
And
there were Guyanese people living in Guyana.
Interesting. What do you think account for that, for the locality? I mean, because...
Well, I think if we take one family, just to give an example, if we take one family and we put them in different places and we leave them there long enough, all of them will have a different way of speaking.
Because and you're rightly, even here in the US, when you hear a Berbician speak, you know that person from Berbice compared to a Demerara dialect. I can't pick up the Essequibo dialect if it's different, but definitely the Berbician, their dialect, you can pick it up almost immediately when they speak. So even within the same cultural group, assume they're Indians, let's say, they have a different, is it a semi-culture? Is it, what would you term that?
Yes, it's not so much a semi-culture, but it's an aspect of the culture that defines you in your particular space. So each body's got their little space that they operate in, and they do things their own way. And once you are away from other people long enough, people start doing things in a particular way. I mean, we got a lot of cultural things that we do. To give you an example, you don't put the pointer broom lean up against the wall. You got to be lying down on the ground. When you go to a funeral, you don't come home and keep your shoes on. You think you got to take off your shoes before you come in the house, and you got to turn backwards and come in by your back because the ghost can come in with you. And it's a whole set of things that we've got culturally that nobody else has.
Is that really culture, though? Is that a superstition?
Well, I think it's cultural, even if it's a superstition. It is cultural because we all have kind of agreed together that that is what we accommodate.
Interesting. That is very interesting, Dr. Rose.
Yes, Mr. Lancaster. Good evening, sir.
Good
and
evening.
Welcome to Globespan. In the context of culture, it is said that Guyana is has a mosaic culture, which in essence means that a mix of ethnic groups, languages, and cultures coexist within the society. Explain the shaping and dynamics of this mosaic culture, if you will.
All right, so I think if we look historically at Guyana, what we see is that people came from different places. So even if we go all the way back, even the indigenous peoples of Guyana, the Amerindians, they were not originally here. They came from somewhere as far back as Asia. And if you look at their visage, their faces, what they look like, you can see ethnically that they're related to the Asian culture. And they came through, as far as we understand it from a historical perspective, through the Bering Straits, down through North America, through Central America, down into South America, and then from South America into the islands of the Caribbean. And if we think about that, they were the first peoples to come here and to inhabit these lands. And they kind of understood pretty much how the topography worked and what was the way to live with that topography. The next set of peoples that came here kind of came after Columbus, and that was the Europeans pretty much. Guyana, as we understand it, was first settled by the Dutch in Essequibo, and then the next place that they went to was Berbice, and then finally they came to the mudflats of Demerara. In 1831, the British put all of this together and created the country we now call Guyana, which was the unification of the three counties. In 1899, the Venezuelans kind of said that they didn't like the demarcation, and we went to arbitration. And Guyana, as we know Guyana now, the shape of Guyana as it is, was determined in 1899. And still, after that, they are coming back to say, no, we didn't make a decision then. We need to make another decision now. But at that point, it was decided that Guyana would be the 83,000 square miles that we now accommodate as Guyana, or the three counties of Essequibo, Demerara, and Berbice.
Mm-hmm.
We are now this country that we call Guyana, as opposed to British Guyana, which in 1966, as you all know, was converted to Guyana when we became independent. And then in 1970, we gained a republic, and we became the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And all of that has contributed to who we are. So we're not only independent, but we're Republican. And more importantly, we have ethnic groups from all the different backgrounds. And all of them brought what they had accommodated in their own lands to Guyana. But of course, they got changed as time went by, and they got adapted to this space, and also with the fact that we were mixing with other people. So it wasn't just what we knew, but we were now accommodating other peoples, and all the peoples came together and created the very unique space that is Guyana, and the unique people that are Guyanese. If I can suggest, that would be the mosaic, or what I like to more call the tapestry that is Guyana.
Okay, now, Guyana has 6 races, as we know.
Well, I'm not too sure about that. And I would want to kind of have a discussion about that point, because in fact, we really don't have 6 races. What we have is Amerindians, Africans, East Indians, Chinese, and what I will call Europeans, because Portuguese and the English are really of the same ethnic background. But they were distinguished because the Portuguese came at indentureship and were considered lower class, and the English did not want to accommodate them as a racial group, but in fact they come from the same racial background. So it's not really that Portuguese are distinctively different from Europeans. They're actually part of the same racial group, but they were distinguished by the fact that they were not as socially mobile as at the time, the English. And then, of course, we've got the mixed group, which I will call the 7th group. If you're going to call it 6, then we got to have a 7th group, which are all the people that are mixed with all the different things from all the different places. The Douglas, the Buffianos, all of those fall into another category, which we can call another race again. So you got to be very careful about this 6 races thing.
So are you telling me that you're rewriting Guyana's history?
I'm not rewriting anything. I'm just explaining that we might have defined it incorrectly previously.
Okay. Now, how many cultures do you think exist in Guyana?
I think there's one culture, actually, the Guyanese culture.
Explain that.
Okay. So Guyanese have a particular way of behaving. Once you're living in a space for long enough, and to give you an example, I'll give you an example of what I mean. I went to school, as I told you, first at St. Rose's, and we had a kind of cultural space in that school. The interesting thing about St. Rose's was a convent previous to our going there, and it was a space that locked off, meaning there was a door at the front that locked once you got into the school. That means you were pretty much closed off from the rest of the world in your school life. And within that culture, that cultural space, regardless of which ethnic background you came from, you kind of operated pretty much the same. So whether you were Indian, Chinese, African, wherever you had come from, you pretty much had the same way of speaking, the same cultural icons, the same identities. Everything about you resonated from that space. And I like to think of Guyana pretty much the same. There's something about the boundaries of this country that give us an almost similar way of approaching things. We might live differently in our homes. We might cook differently at an individual family level. But when it comes to the way we approach life, the way we think about life, the things we do, you can always know Guyanese. I'll give you an example of what I mean. And I'm going to use maybe a bad word here, but I'll kind of say it in a way that you all understand. So I was coming home from the UK on a flight, and we stopped in Trinidad. The plane stopped in Trinidad. And what I thought was a white man, who later I learned was really an Indian of very high color, and he was bald. So I could not kind of get a take where he was from. We stopped in Trinidad for a very long time. And the man get up and the man say, what the SKU going on here? And all of a sudden, I knew that was a Guyanese. Because it's only Guyanese that use language in that particular way. So regardless of how he looked, I realized immediately that this was a Guyanese I was speaking to. So that's what I mean when I say we have a very particular way of operating that is culturally different from Trinidadians, from Barbadians, from Jamaicans, from anybody else. Guyanese as a whole have a cultural space that is all our own.
I'm not sure when my colleague Charles asked you what is culture. Can you define the meaning of the word culture in its broadest sense?
Well, I'm not an academic, and it would not behoove me to really suggest that I could possibly define a word like culture. What I would more want to do is to suggest that culture is broadly a series of behaviors that a group of people accommodate together. But my definition could never be, I would not suggest that my definition is at any level academic. I would have preferred that Al was on the program here and that he could take over this part of the discussion. As an academic, I think he is more qualified to do that.
Well, Russel, before Doug go on, what would you consider to be element of a culture? I know you mentioned the language, the food, the clothing, and as you rightly said, all of us went to school in Guyana. We wear the same clothes, whether you're of whatever ancestry you're from, we wear the same clothes. We basically eat the same food because you go there and somebody share your food with among your friends. We speak the same language. What else element is there in a culture that defines the people?
When you come down to it, I think culture is about expression, life expression. So we're talking about all the things that define us as a people, as a particular people. Our art, to give you an example, I always say that culturally, if we're going to take a look at our music, to give you an example, chutney is about the best example of what our culture is about. Because chutney music really speaks to our mix of cultures. I don't think, because when we think about it, okay, so Indians brought Indian music from India. And Indians still listen to Indian music. Even although they might not understand it per se, they still listen to it. And they still feel quite connected to it. Africans, on the other hand, because of the issues that happened with them, don't really have African music as a background thing. In fact, because when Africans were enslaved, they were kind of denuded of their culture. They had to change their names, they had to change the things they were doing. Pretty much the only thing that was kept was the drumming. But in terms of language, in terms of music, all those things were taken away. So people talk about African culture from the standpoint of European culture. So English music is considered African, while Indian music is considered Indian, just to give you an example. But in Guyana, what has happened, I think we are kind of like chameleon-like. We adopt whatever is around our space. We can adapt into pretty much any situation. If you go into the US, we speak like the US. If you go into England, we speak like the English. We're adaptable. So I like to think of us as chameleons. If we want to put one point on our culture, is that we're chameleon-like. We can adapt to almost any situation.
Don't you think that we have 10 different regions. And if you look carefully at those regions, don't you think our cultures in each region are different? You said you were up the quarantine at one time and you did not understand the language spoken by some people there. I guess they were Indians. But the point remains, language alone does not make up a culture. It's only part of it.
I never suggested at any level that language alone makes up a culture, as I've been saying all evening. There's so many elements to culture: food, clothing, language. There's so many things that define who we are. So we cannot ever suggest that there's any one thing that points to a cultural definition. And that's why I also said that culture is an evolving thing. So it's not even something that stays the same way for all time. It changes as we go along. It changes as we are introduced to different things.
But
is there,
okay,
is there any element, Russell, that stands out as the number one component of a culture? Whether it's the music, the language, well, I don't know, but in your experience, any particular component stands out as the number one part of that culture?
I think one of the things that stands out for me particularly is artistic expression. So when we talk about theater, when we talk about music, when we talk about art, and here I'm talking very specifically about things like painting and sculpture and those things kind of seem to be the frontal aspect of what culture means. But culture is really a lot deeper than that. People will look at those things to say, well, this is the cultural expression of this group. But as I said, culture is too broad-based to be defined by any one thing.
Now, let me ask you this question. Well, not ask you, let me see what experts believe that define one of the main components or one of the major ingredients of a culture is the behavior and attitude of people. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think earlier I expressed that Guyanese tend to behave pretty much the same way wherever they are. And you can almost know a Guyanese even if you don't know them because of their behavior. So I do agree. I am not an expert, and I could not suggest at any level that I could speak to this at an expert level. But I would agree that at some level, people's behavior do.
So are you telling our listeners that the culture is in Berbice, the culture in Linden, the culture in Bartica, the culture in Georgetown, they're all different?
They're both different and the same.
Explain.
Okay, so as I said earlier, if we put people in a space by themselves for long enough, they will adopt attitudes and habits that do not cross over to other groups in other spaces. But generally, they will have the same behaviors once they also interact. So to give you an example, the people from the quarantine come to Georgetown. The people from Linden come to Georgetown. The people from Georgetown go to Essequibo. The people from Essequibo come to Linden. So we're still seeing each other. We're not fully divided. We're still seeing each other at some point or other, and we're still seeing things and learning things from others. And so the culture will kind of cross-breed, but still have its little issues that are happening in their spaces that are distinct from others. So it's both the same and different. That's what I mean.
If you look at Canada, it's considered one of the most multicultural societies in the world. Toronto, they claimed, is the most multicultural city in the world. But their culture, or the inhabitants there, are no different from people of New York, Amsterdam, Paris, and those areas. So I don't know if you did any research or did any studies as to why, but why do you think the Canadian culture or multiculturalism is more predominant than the other cultures?
I have no idea. I've never gone to Canada. I don't know Canada at all. I've never seen it. So unfortunately, I can't speak to that.
Now, Guyana is considered part of the Caribbean, but that's only geographically, language, socially, and its inherent colonialism. But as you know, geographically, it's not. I said, but it's not. Is there any similarities with our culture from those in the Caribbean?
I think we're more culturally connected to the Caribbean than we are to South America. Very simply because we came out of the same historical background. South America, to a large extent, is Spanish, and most of the peoples in South America are of Spanish descent. Well, actually, all the rest, except for Brazil, French Guyana, and Dutch Guyana, along with ourselves. So if we are to really understand why we are more culturally connected to the Caribbean, is because all of us kind of went through the same cultural pattern. Sugar was the main element that guided the countries of the Caribbean along with Guyana. And most of the countries in the Caribbean were British ruled or British colonies. And so that colonial background is something that is shared. For that reason, the fact that we both speak English came through the culture of sugar and slavery and are connected in a sense because we are on the very edge of South America. We are more connected, I think, culturally to the Caribbean than we are to South America.
Charles?
Russ, do you think that, in your view, that even though you mentioned we have a distinct Guyanese culture, but within that distinct Guyanese culture, we have an Indian culture, we have an African culture, we have an Amerindian culture, and so on. Does culture has anything to do with the racial problem that we're encountering in Guyana?
Okay, so let me go back a little bit and just talk a little bit about the historical issues that we have. So there's a world issue where Black people are considered to be at the lowest end of the spectrum. That's a world issue. At another level, we have the issue of slavery, which kind of suggested that Black people were less than other people and therefore should be treated in a certain way. But concomitant with that is the idea that white people or Europeans are superior to other people. And so there is what I will call a class stratification that has contributed in a very large way to even the issues that we have in our country. If we don't understand that, if we don't understand the background of this, as I said, it started with slavery and indentureship, and then later on, it got to the point where coming down to the 50s and elections, we then had another set of problems that we had to deal with. And this was using race as a means of political power and pressure. That kind of contributed to the raising again of the problem. So the problem has not been something that started back then. It started back then, but then it was perpetuated over and over again to the point that we are now in the position where the racial tension that we have has really been a long-term issue that has been coming down over time to the space that we're at. The problem with this is that if we don't understand that history repeats itself, and more that if you've got a historical ingraining, then it's more difficult to change, then we don't understand the problem at all.
And I know we see Mr. Al Creighton has joined us. Al, welcome to the program tonight.
Good night, Al.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. As I had explained, I had to leave another meeting to get here, but then that was not the problem. The problem was the length of time it took for me to get in. It took me really very long time to get in.
I know the traffic in Guyana is crazy these days, right?
So I'm sorry that I'm disappointed. But
well, thank you, Al, because Russel has been doing an excellent job taking us through the first part of our program. We want to take a short commercial break now. When we come back, Al, we will continue discussion where Russel has been able to brilliantly answer our questions to our audience tonight. So we take a short break and we'll be back shortly. Don't go anywhere.
Flights to Guyana have never been cheaper. Check out these non-stop direct fares from JFK to Guyana. One way from $150 and round trip from $344. From Guyana to New York, one way from $210 and round trip from $360. These are non-stop direct flights to and from Guyana on American, Caribbean, or JetBlue. These cheap fares will not last, so call Travelspan today. In New York at 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. In Georgetown, call 227-1701. And in Berbice, call 337-4287. All From One Supplier is pleased to announce its online shipping for West Indian and American groceries. Order online at allfromonesupplier.com and with free shipping and deliveries to any part of the United States. Save time and energy to shop for all of your West Indian groceries from the safety of your home or office. We carry West Indian products like curry powders, meats and fish, dashing bush, pepper sauce, sodas, and your favorite snacks. All From One Supplier has it all. All From One Supplier fulfills and ships your order directly to you. So visit All From One Supplier today to start shopping. Or call All From One Supplier at 718-551-3292 to handle all of your West Indian grocery needs. That's All From One Supplier, 718-551-3292. Free shipping, free deliveries, or curbside pickup from allfromonesupplier.com. Make your vacation a memorable one. Enjoy your trip just as if you are at home. Your music, your culture, and your way to have fun with all you can eat and drink at an all-inclusive vacation. You choose the all-inclusive vacation that suits you. July 14th to July 18th is Bollywood on the Beach, plus Indo-Cultural in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. July 21st to July 25th, Christian Community Week in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. July 28th to August 1st, Curry Duck Curry Competition in Cancun, Mexico. August 4th to August 8th, Caribbean Throwback Week, Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. And August 11th to August 15th, Soca vs. Indian, Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Seats are available from New York, Miami, Orlando, Atlanta, Newark, Canada, Trinidad, and Guyana. Meet up with family and friends, and plus make new friends at all these inclusive vacations. Travelspan has your vacations, plus cheap seats to Guyana and Trinidad. Call Travelspan today at 718-845-0437. That's 718-845-0437. In Canada, call 647-557-6200. In Guyana, call 227-1701. And in Trinidad, call 645-1604. Folks, the Nest Restaurant is the place to dine for Guyanese and Caribbean dishes. It is the best restaurant in Queens. The staff is courteous, and Dave, the owner, is always there to welcome you. So for a memorable dining experience, visit the Nest Restaurant located at 12717 101 Avenue, South Richmond Hill. Go and make a reservation today, or takeout. Call 718-847-4035. Are you looking for investment opportunities or retirement or even to relocate to Florida? Then Orlando is the place for you. Great deals with spacious land are available. Call Shanisa Jabbar for all your realtor needs at 321-217-1556. That's 321-217-1556. Or email her at shanisajabbar@gmail.com.
Welcome back to our audience as we welcome with us Al Creighton, another cultural icon of Guyana. He lectures at the University of Guyana as well. And we understand you, Mr. Creighton, you had a lecture going on. So we want to thank you for joining us this evening. We were, as I said, we were talking to Russel, and he was very, great in his presentation. But in terms of culture as an academia, what will be a definition of a culture?
Well, it's a wide definition. It covers a wide area of things, Normally speaking, in popular language, when people say culture, they normally mean performance. They talk about a cultural item, which would be a performance item, and so on. But that is a misuse of the term, actually, because culture is actually much wider, and it describes a way of life. It describes a world picture, how people see their lives in a social setting. And culture is a way of life. For example, it covers things outside of the arts. The arts is one area of culture because people use the arts to express themselves, to express their community, and to express their world, to express their world view, their cosmos, how they see the world, and they express it in art, using art. And they would express it in mythology and the different kinds of things, the visual arts or the performing arts. But culture goes wider than the arts. It goes wider than performance because it also includes things like dress. How do you dress in your society? How do you build your houses? What do you eat? And so on. So that is culture. Culture basically covers the way of life of a people. And when you talk about different cultures, you will have different cultures because different groups of people, whether they belong to geographical areas or so on, will have a different way of life, and that is where you get different cultures. And I'm trying to give you a kind of a general idea of what it is and what is meant by culture. But then it narrows down to expression of the world picture, the way of life, the cosmos of a people.
And that's beautifully put. And I think Russel did exactly something near to that. But Al, can there be a culture within a culture in terms of, within Guyana, we have a Guyanese culture, but within Guyana, we have the other ethnic group, the African group, the Indian group, the Amerindian group, and so on. And they themselves have their own culture that is within the Guyanese culture. How does that play out in terms of an Indian culture together with the Guyanese culture, an African culture with the Guyanese culture? How would you explain that to us?
All right. Now, first of all, one thing you can say that Guyana has a Caribbean culture. Even though Guyana is located in South America, and it is surrounded by countries which have either a South American or either a Latin American culture or some other. You have Latin American type of cultures, basically Venezuela. Suriname tends to be a little different from Venezuela, but Guyana is different from all of them. First of all, in language. And language, I may say, is another part of culture. So that Guyana, even though located in South America, has a Caribbean culture. That is where most of the cultural traits of the country can be located, in the Caribbean. Now, the other thing you can say about Guyanese culture, or basically before you get to the Guyanese culture, about culture in general, is that you can have a country that is multicultural, or you can have a country that is cross-cultural. You can have a country where there's a blend of groups of people into one culture, but you can also have in the same country multiple cultures. So you talk about a multicultural society. who is it? Is it the sociologists or the political scientists who call it a plural society? And Guyana is that. Now, one thing that is not so easy to explain, and people don't sometimes see it that way, is that one, any of the different cultural groups in Guyana, like the Indian, the East Indian culture, the kind of cultural traits as against the African and against, well, very diminished, but the Chinese, the Amerindian culture might be the strongest one, and so on. And you have those different cultures in Guyana. Portuguese culture used to be a bit stronger in history. But all of those cultures occupy the same space. So therefore, you can call Guyana a multicultural society. The term cross-cultural is used when there are mergers of these different groups. And arguably, it is a debatable point to say to what extent are there mergers in Guyana of these different groups. When you look at the cultures, sometimes you are alarmed at the similarities in what they do. You are really alarmed at the similarities. And well, Guyana has a cultural problem in the sense of racial hostilities and racial contentions and conflicts. And sometimes you wonder, when you look at the similarities, it basically flies in the face of the conflicts, which are based on differences. The other thing too that people in cultural studies will tell you is that differences make a culture. Differences make a culture rather than sow the seeds of conflict. Guyana is rich. Guyana is rich because it has different cultures, all of them expressing something Guyanese. So it is rich there. And besides, all of these cultural groups, the East Indian cultural groups, have been resident in Guyana for a long time. During that time, they have managed to develop traditions, which are Guyanese traditions. Never mind, they are East Indian. They are Guyanese traditions because they were built in Guyana. Since the people came here under indentureship, the African community would have traditions that have been developing, and some of these traditions will have African roots, but the African roots are getting weaker every year in Guyana. But they have developed things which are Guyanese. You can call Guyanese.
Got you.
The Amerindians are on a different level because they are the first people, and their culture is very deep rooted, and it has been there since their existence all these centuries in Guyana. So that's what I would say about that part of it.
Okay. We know I'm going to come back to culture, but let's go to Mashramani. What is Mashramani, Mr. Lancaster?
I think Al would be a better person to answer that. He wrote a wonderful article a couple of days ago, which I think really explained to a deep level why the word might not have been the best word, but it is a word that we now all accept. So if we're going to think of it from a cultural level, Mashramani is now understood as a particular thing. But I think Al would be a better person to answer that question.
Okay. Where to originate from the word Mashramani, Mr. Creighton?
All right. Now, people, Guyanese will tell you that Mashramani means celebration after cooperative work or celebration after hard work, and that it is an Arawak word which describes a custom among the Arawaks to have a celebration after hard work. Now, that is the name Mashramani given to the festival that celebrates Guyana as a republic. Mashramani is a festival which was created to celebrate Guyana Republic Day. Since 1970, the first Republic Day in Guyana, Mashramani has been there to celebrate it because it was created, it was manufactured for that purpose. The name was given to it because they wanted to find a name with a cultural, traditional meaning that could represent the country. And so they found the term Mashramani. And Mashramani has come down with the meaning that I pointed out to you, where every Guyanese will tell you that this is what the word means, and this is where the word comes from. But I am afraid I would have to say that that is not accurate. What has been said about the name Mashramani is not accurate. There is no Amerindian word. Mashramani is not found, has never been found in the Arawak language or in any other Amerindian language. And that meaning that is given to it is not found in the language either. The Arawak scholar, Canon J.P. Bennett, explained that the closest word that you can find to Mashramani in the Arawak language is a word called Mashirimehi. And Mashirimehi is an Arawak word which means work, cooperative work. It has nothing to do with celebration. And when Bennett was commenting on Mashramani, how the word is used for Mashramani, he said that the word Mashramani is a coinage. It's a coined word, a word that was made up, but it does not represent any word existing in the Arawak language. And also, he said that the closest to it is Meshirimehi, which means work, cooperative work, and it has nothing to do with celebration. And he said that there is no word in the Arawak language that describes celebration after work. So basically, that is where it is. And I don't know. Guyanese might feel a bit offended by that, but that is what close research has revealed. So that is the name. You were asking something else about Mashramani, but I will allow you to ask what you want to.
No, but before I ask the second question, I'm not sure, but I'm of the opinion, or my understanding is that Mashramani is being taught in schools as an Arabic word. So this means that that's wrong.
An Arabic word?
Not Arabic. Arawak word.
Yes, it's wrong. According to the Lokono experts, it is wrong. My sources are the people who actually first used the word. I consulted the people who first used the word to describe the festival. I consulted Bennett. I consulted Richard Alsop, the responsible for the dictionary, and I consulted the Amerindian Research Unit at the University of Guyana. So those are my sources. What I've explained to you comes from a combination of those sources. So that what is being taught in schools about the word is unfortunately not accurate.
If I could interject, the interesting thing, and this is why I say culture is dynamic. So that might not be the origin of the word, but at a cultural level, we've all come to accept that this is what it means, and we all use it as a means of expression about what that celebration is about. So at a Guyanese level, we have all recoined a word, whether it is the correct origin or not, to mean the thing we do when we want to celebrate. So yes, culturally, if we are to go back, this does not come out of the Arawak language, but at the same time that is so, It is the thing that we use to express a particular space in our common understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, what I would say is that never mind the origin of the word, because the origin of the word was never found. The very people who first use it wasn't able to explain where it came from when they learned that it was not an Arawak word. But the point is that that is the word used to name the festival. And the festival has now become quite a popular and unmovable tradition in Guyana. So up to a certain point, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter where the word came from. What is it? What matters is that that is the festival, and that's what the festival is called. But if you're going to go back into linguistic accuracy, then you cannot say that this is the origin of the word and this is what it means. Right now, Mashramani means a Guyana festival, a festival celebrated in Guyana. Very popular, a deep tradition in the country. And you're not going to change that. You're not going to say stop using the word or anything. You're not going to do that because that's what the festival is.
Okay. You talk about a Caribbean culture. What is the Caribbean culture?
Well, that again is not easy to answer in one sentence because there are still different cultures in the Caribbean. But let me see if I can pinpoint certain things about it that make it different, for example, from the Latin American culture. The Caribbean culture is a mixture of various things. It's a mixture of all the various people who came in under indentureship. It's a mixture of the African and the European. And before indentureship, there was a very strong mixture of the African and the European across the Caribbean in many ways, in many things. The performances, the oral literature, and so on, and all the other things which express the way of life of the people in the Caribbean. How they dress, their music, the food, and different things, which are all there, has that particular mixture of the different cultures in it. The people who, after the African and the European, which gave a very strong foundation to it, in all the Caribbean countries except Guyana and Belize, the Amerindian elements faded very rapidly, well, not rapidly, but faded to the point where in most cases it's not easy to recognize them. Quite different from what has happened in Guyana and Belize. So that Guyana and Belize would have the strong Amerindian element in their culture, while the other Caribbean people do not. In Jamaica, for example, they claim the Arawak. In Jamaica, they claim the Arawak, that the Arawak is a part of the heritage, and it is there, but it is, and so you get that, but it is not as strong. So in talking about Caribbean culture, that's where you are going to find it. It has to do with the language, the Creole languages across the Caribbean, and the kind of cultural practices that you find in the traditions. These traditions are going to be rooted in the African, or they are going to be rooted in the Indian. In some other parts of the Caribbean, the Chinese in Jamaica is still strong, and you will find these culture. Now, one thing also that unites the Caribbean culture is the carnivalesque. The carnival. You don't have carnival in all the Caribbean countries, but you have the carnivalesque. You have traditions and celebrations which have the same form as carnival. Street parades, music and so on, street parades, costume bands and speeches and so on, those kind of things you find across the board in the Caribbean, even in countries that do not have carnival. So basically, that's how we would describe, I'm trying to describe a Caribbean culture that exists.
Yes.
I think one of the things that is very important is the masquerade. And Al, maybe you should talk a little bit about that, because I think that is one element that really runs through pretty much all of the Caribbean culture, the masquerade.
Yes, it does. And that's what I meant when I talk about street parades and costume bands. Street parades and costume bands. The masquerade tradition is shown in all of those. And the masquerade tradition is different in the various Caribbean countries, but it is there. And even in Carnival, you have a masquerade tradition. Jamaica and Guyana share a masquerade tradition which is similar, very, very similar between the two countries. The only little difference now is that it has practically virtually died out in Guyana, but it is still there in Jamaica. You may find it on the East Coast, on the, not East Coast, you may find it in the Essequibo coast in Guyana. Jamaica still has much of it, even though it has faded. Belize has masquerade traditions too. But I meant to talk about the Bahamas, which at the moment has the most vibrant masquerade tradition across the Caribbean. And the Bahamas, John Canoe in the Bahamas. The Jamaican masquerade is also called John Canoe, but it's a different thing from what happens in the Bahamas. You have St. Kitts, the mummies, and so on in St. Kitts. So, yes, the masquerade tradition is a strong part of the Caribbean cultural traditions.
Is religion part of a nation's culture?
Religion?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Religion is a part of it because religion is a part of the way of life. Religion is a part of the beliefs of the people, the faith, and in many instances, this faith expresses itself in certain ways. It expresses itself in the way the people dress. It expresses itself sometimes in what they eat. It expresses itself in their beliefs, the stories that they would tell, and the music that they play. Very strong in Guyana, where that is concerned, would be the Muslim and the Hindu. And you talk about the effect that the religion has on many other aspects of culture. You will find it very strong in the Muslims, in the Islam. You find it very strong in the Hindus.
What is Obia?
Obia?
Yeah.
Obia is a very misunderstood phenomenon in the Caribbean, very misunderstood. Obia is an African tradition, African religious, African spiritual tradition. It used to be used in battle, for example. I'm talking now about in the Caribbean because it came over from Africa, from the African tradition. It came over to the Caribbean, and it used to be used in battle. For example, wars in Jamaica. The Maroons waged battle against the English in Jamaica for quite a while. Ended up being given their own quarters of land in Jamaica. The Maroons used Obia to fight. The famous military leader, Nani, of the Maroons was described as an Obia woman. Nani could use Obia to heal wounds. She could use Obia to actually protect the fighters from harm, and if they got injured, to heal them, and so on. And so that basically gives you a good idea of the background of Obia. And this is not folklore. What I was just telling you is not folklore, it's history recorded by historians. And that is what Obia was known as in the Caribbean for a long time. Obia was also a part of the masquerade in Jamaica, the Jonkunu, with a certain drum called the gumbe drums, the drums that was basically used in Obia and was used there. Now, these have come not to be understood in the modern Caribbean. And what you find in the modern Caribbean are, you do have people who call themselves Obia men, Obia women. Some of them are con artists. They don't know the trade, but they practice it to get money, and they fleece people. They have given Obia a bad name. There might be a few people who still know it, who still know Obia, and still know what it is. But they're hard to find, and so the people in the Caribbean, some people laugh at Obia. They laugh at it. It's a laughing thing. Some people are afraid of it because they see it as something that people use to harm people. They only see Obia as something that people use to harm others. And so that is the kind of thing. Of course, Obia was criminalized by the colonial powers. At some point along the line, it was criminalized. And so basically that is Obia as it is now. And that's why I'm saying that it's misunderstood.
My question to you is this: the way it's being practiced in maybe parts of the Caribbean and in Guyana, is that part of the Afro-Guyanese or Afro-Caribbean culture?
Well, it is no longer Afro-Caribbean in Guyana or in Suriname, because when you go through quite a few of the most prominent Obia practitioners that have been named and identified in Guyana have been Indian, East Indian. Obia is as strong a tradition in modern Guyana or in recent Guyana as among the Indians as it is among the Africans, even though Africa is traced as the source of Obia coming across into the Caribbean.
Would Obia and Kali be the same thing?
No, Obia and Kali are not the same thing. They are very close though, and that is why some people take the Kali for Obia, because the Kali has, certain powers that people have in the Kalimai, and they practice those powers. It's very similar, so that I hesitate to say no, it is not Obia.
Okay. I have a question for you. It's a very tricky question, so be careful how you answer this one. Now, it is said that there are intra-race cultures. Intra-race cultures. For example, you have in the Hindu, you have the Brahmin, the Chitri, the Madras, the Muslim, and so forth. And each one of them, I think, do have a different culture. Would you support that argument by saying that, yes, they're intra-race culture? Intra-race, yes. Intra, not intra.
Yes, I can support that, because you gave some good examples. The Brahmin, as against other castes within the Indian consciousness, it is not quite, well, I don't even know if I have the authority to say it is not quite so strong today as it was some years ago. So let me not try to say that. Let me just simply say that, yes, you're correct. The Brahmin culture is different from the other cultures within and in fact they have low caste, the notion of low caste among them. And you have stories where a Brahmin would refuse would refuse to eat food cooked by a member of some other caste and something like that. But there are stories that you get, that come to you and that you don't have to, that you have researched and found. So that is it. Yes.
Have you ever heard the terminology melting pot?
Yes, I have heard it.
Which country is considered having a melting pot type of culture?
I'm not sure if I believe in it. I'm not sure if I can say it is what has happened to cultures in the Caribbean. I am not ready to say that melting pot is what has happened.
What about the United States? What about the United States?
Neither. Now, you see, cultures can merge and things can emerge. The United States have a culture, which is American, a wide range of American culture, while in the United States has become metropolitan, so that below the surface of the wide-ranging, broad American culture, you will find the different the cultures of the different groups of people that make up this metropolis, the metropolitan culture, all the different parts of Europe. What people from different parts of Europe, the Italians as against the Syrians against the Jews, and so on, the East European people, a wide range of Eastern European people and so on, who all exist in America. And if you go deep into them, you're going to find their cultural practices, which are different from the broad-based American culture. And of course, America has long since colonized and taken over the Amerindian cultures from across the board in America, which still exists below the surface. So yes, that exists. Canada has the same thing, and you get strong Amerindian cultures in Canada, and so on. So that it's not so easy to mix cultures and mix them out and away. That they talk about the term potpourri is often about the Caribbean, and you use the term melting pot. I suppose they both mean the same thing, but one has to approach those things with care. I don't think that they can accurately describe the culture of these countries.
Okay. Have you ever heard about the Maccabee version of the Bible?
I've heard about it, yes.
You haven't read it?
Well, where can I get a copy? I have heard about it. I've been hearing about it from in Jamaica. It was a big thing in Jamaica, and particularly since the Rastafari right. Talk about it a lot, and they use it as a kind of thing to say this is how the Europeans obliterated these books from the Bible because they didn't want people to read them, and so on. And there was even a very popular song that used to talk about bring back Maccabee version, and so on. But I've never managed to get a copy to read it. I will be very happy.
Lend me yours. And it deals with African culture, Black culture in general. So my question to you, well, it's a tough question because you haven't read it. But do you believe from what you're saying that is part of the African culture, the Maccabee version of the Bible, and not the King James version as we presently use today?
Well, I can say that the King James version might well have left out things. I could say that, and the King James version is a translation. That's why they call it King James, because it was translated into the language at the time of King James. Now, when people open the Bible today and they read the language of the Bible and they believe that that is the language of Christianity, they believe that that is the language that they must use when they are praying, and so on, these kind of things about thee and thy and thine, and blessed and endeth and so on, and those words. That is the King James language. It has nothing to do with the original Bible. It's the King James language.
The Maccabees version has no mention of Adam and Eve being the first two people on earth. But Charles, over to you. That's a different topic.
Just to follow up on what and we asked, and Russell was answering the question well as well. Is there any specific element within a culture that stands out as the most distinct feature of a culture? Is that possible?
But my answer is yes, it is possible, and it does happen sometimes.
So, which element might be the most pronounced element within a culture? Is it language, the food, the dress, the dance, the music? What might be that?
It's different. It's different in different cultures. It's not quite the same thing in all the cultures. In some cases, let me see. Let's cast my mind to Latin American. What is it that makes Latin American culture strong? One thing is the music, because the music is very prevalent, very popular, and noticeable. So you have that. Another part of Latin American culture is the language. So you get the language because you know, you have the language, but the religion is also strong. I was trying to see which element of the Latin American culture is the strongest, and I'm not finding it.
Okay. In the Guyana context, what would you think might be number one element within the Indian culture and within the African culture? What might stand out as the most prominent of that culture, of those cultures?
I would want to say the cultural expression, they are traditions, the performance traditions. Okay. Because the performance traditions, the expressions of the East Indian in Guyana is very pronounced. It's very pronounced. The music and dance and so on. And Hinduism happens to be a religion that makes great use of dance and music. And so that has become a very pronounced. But then the most visible element though is the dress. The dress is the most visible element. Okay. And that goes for both Hindu and Muslim.
Yeah. I asked again Russell this question, and he did very well in answering it, but we want to hear your view on it. Trinidad and Guyana, we have this more more cultural, as you say, multicultural society. Suriname also have the same multicultural society, but yet Suriname do not have that racial animosity that we have experienced in Guyana and in Trinidad. Do you think the element of our culture within Guyana and Trinidad contribute to that racial element? Whereas in Suriname, the same cultural mix, they don't have that racial problem like we have in Guyana and Trinidad.
I think it partly depend on the history. What happened in the history? What happened in the history in Suriname is not the same as what happened in the history in Guyana. And Guyana and Trinidad are similar. And you do have the hostilities in Trinidad. They are there. I perhaps sometimes not as crassly expressed as you find them in Guyana, but they are there though in Trinidad. You do have the racial,
I'm saying Guyana and Trinidad, we have that racial problem, but not so much in Suriname.
Yes, and not Suriname, yes. No, I want to feel that the history has a lot to do with it, because there was a kind of a division which came into the history when it has to do with abolition, and it has to do with the people, the formerly enslaved, and their attitude to the plantation. And it had to do with the labor problem, the labor.
I think you got disconnected with Russ, with Al there. I know, Russ, you were saying the same thing that Al is saying.
Yes, we kind of have the same view on it.
Okay, by the time I'll get back on stream, let's get to solution for the next 10 minutes we have. What is the solution? Because as both of you mentioned, there are many similarities between the major cultures, the Indian culture, the African culture, and so on. What is the solution to bring our people together, whether it's through the cultural route or through a national platform? What do you think might be the solution?
So as I said, I think education is critical. I think if we begin to understand our similarities as opposed to our differences, if we begin to understand the roots of where the problem originated, I think that will be the major solution to finding a way to fix this problem. When we understand that, to a large extent, divide and rule was used as a very potent weapon to even get us into conflict. And then later on, the whole issue of what I will call stratification or social class was used, then we understand that if we're going to fix the problem, we first need to educate our people as to where the problem originated. And then we've got to let them understand that it is only through working to get our children to have a different way of looking at life that we can fix the problem.
And that starts from where?
It starts with the home. It starts with you telling your child that this person is not another person. It is our person. If it doesn't start in the home, even if you go into the school environment and that's taught, then the issue will be negated when it gets back into the home. So unless a person is willing to make the change themselves and then teach their children differently, then the problem will be perpetuated for as long as people keep living like that.
Should there be an institution in Guyana, well, not in Demerara, but throughout Guyana, that will be a bridge between the cultural mix of Guyana to showcase our, those similarities and let the people from every ethnic group knows that, hey, this is what we are. Let us not divide ourselves by what differentiates us. Let us unite ourselves by what is common among us. You think that should be something that the Ministry of Education maybe should put on their curriculum?
Well, I think there are two approaches. There's a top-down approach and there's the bottom-up approach. So leadership is not merely top-down. Leadership can also be bottom-up. And I think you've got to approach it from both sides. If we were to think of the school system, let's say the Ministry of Education decided to institute a program that really teaches cultural studies from very early on, then we will get a change at that level. That is a top-down approach. But even in our communities, you've got community groups, you've got cultural groups. Even within a cultural group, if we can get a program that teaches about multiculturalism, why we're different, how we're different, and what makes us the same as people, then I think we'd be dealing with it from both ends of the question, as opposed to just the top-down approach.
Don't you think, Russ, that if our two major political parties, that basically I'm not blaming them for a division of our people, but they contribute significantly to it. Should they be able to work together, wouldn't that leapfrog the progress of unity among our people, you think?
The problem that we have is that politics is its own animal. And there's something called the political cycle, which means either one part or another want to win. And if they want to win, then they're going to use whatever means is available to them to win. So their concern is not so much about the long-term elements of building a society that is homogeneous. What they're more concerned about is winning the next election. And if we've got to keep racial divisions in order to do that, well, we'll do it. That's the problem from trying to approach it from a political level.
Well said, Doc.
Okay, Mr. Al is not there,
I
so
know
hopefully
we
I can answer this
Al
question.
apparently his battery might have gone, so we got disconnected.
It is said that the nation's culture defines that nation based on its customs, its tradition, and its
Seems
heritage.
Al is back.
Yeah, Al is back. Al, are you there?
Where is he?
Al?
Al, are,
Go on, Doc. Go on.
Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry about that, Doc.
is-
Please read your question again.
it is said that a nation's culture defines that nation because of its traits, tradition, and culture and customs. Now, if that is true, then what are some of the traits in Guyana? What are some of the traditions in Guyana? And what are some of the customs in Guyana that defines this country's culture?
I think that all of us can answer those questions. I think we all know the things that make us Guyanese. I mean, I listened to this lady who does something about our language and the way we approach things. And Guyanese have a curious set of traits, a curious set of traditions, a curious set of norms that I think we all accommodate. We are people who is generally very accommodating of other people. It's always been said that Guyanese are quite possibly the most accommodating people there. They'll invite you into their homes, they'll give you their bed to sleep on, they'll treat you in a way that pretty much nobody else will. If you come into their house, they're going to give you a plate of food, regardless if they got or not. Guyanese are loving people. We are people who care about each other to the point, I think, of fastness. We want to get into other people's business. We want to know what's happening in other people's lives. And we are more than willing to talk about it. I mean, gossip is a big part of our culture. And if we understand these things about ourselves, I mean, regardless of where we go, we know, for instance, we like to get together at a community level. We like to drink liquor. We like to eat food. We like to share our lives with each other. These are things that are particularly Guyanese, regardless of where we are. And I think that's some of the things that we miss when we go out of Guyana and live abroad. We don't have that kind of connection that really makes living in Guyana.
Yeah. Well said.
And so we really want to connect with it again.
Well said, Russell. Time is run out of us. I know Al admits this again. But you know, Russell, today the Indian community, the Hindu community is celebrating Shivratri. So throughout the night, they will be chanting songs and music and throughout the night. So in closing, you want to say anything to the Hindu community and anything in closing?
But the thing is, as I said, I think we're multicultural. I have shared in pretty much every tradition in the Indian culture. I've eaten 7 curry at a wedding. I've got friends of every ilk, as I told you before. And I would always want to think that we can hold on to our traditions as much as we mingle with the other cultures in our country. So to them, I would want to say, have a blessed evening, and I trust that their prayers are worthy and that they can benefit from having that experience.
Thank you, Russell. Doc, anything in closing?
Well, mine are the same. We want better internet services in this country, because every time we try talking to someone, it's always popped off. We want government offices to remain open during lunch hours. We want all newly appointed public servants to be paid within the first 40 days at least, and not 3 months as scheduled. We also want asking public servants to answer the landline phones. They do not. And to make sure that you respect the people you serve. And also salaries for teachers, nurses, police officers, and others at a minimum should be $125 per month starting with.
$125,000.
$1,000 per month. This will actually reduce some of the corruption. We'd say police officers take bribe and so forth. I have a cousin who's a police officer. I'm not going to say where. But he said he has a wife and 3 kids. And his salary is just $85,000 a month. And he got to pay a rent of $40,000 from that. After tax, it takes him about $72,000. How do you expect that guy to live? He has to take money from you. So that can only be corrected if the salaries are increased. And that's what I would like to see in this country.
All right.
We can't pay people minimum wages or starvation wages anymore. The time has passed for that. Thank you to all our listeners, and hope to see you again next Monday.
It should be, I would up that salary minimum to at least $1,000 US a month, which is $200,000. I think that should be a fair deal. But again, we want to thank all our viewers. We want to thank Al for, I know we miss him again, to you, Russell, for being here with us. To all our viewers, to all our Hindu community, we want to happy Shivratri, and I hope the blessing of Shiva be with you and all your family. Until the next time.
Well said, Charles. Concur. Well said, I concur.
Yeah, and Al, I see Al is on again, but Al, your mute is on. Do you want to say anything in closing? I think we...
Al, can you get off your mute? Can you turn your mute off?
Anyway, I think we'll have to close now. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, Al, for being with us as well, and to all our viewers, to Devin and to Noah and all our entire team. Have a good evening. God bless you all, and God bless our great country. Yes, Al, you're on now. Yes. Anything in closing? And the Hindu community celebrate Shivratri today, if you want to send greetings to them.
Have been able to be a part of this discussion tonight and to make some contribution, which I hope did in fact make a contribution to the knowledge and to the to the learning that one can get from this program.
I'm sure that our audience have learned a lot about our cultures tonight from both of you. Cultural icons, I called you all, Mr. Lancaster, Mr. Creighton. And I hope that they will take into consideration what has been said here tonight and at least live with that tradition.
So thank you again, both
very much for having
Al and to Russell and to our viewers. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless our great